Hi, this is Joy at Pine Quilt Shop. Today we're talking about making half square triangles, and we're going to focus on methods that you can use to make multiple half square triangles at a time. So we're going to start by talking about the 2 at a time method. So to make half square triangles 2 at a time, you're going to cut squares of fabric and put them right sides together. So if you are doing the 2 at a time method, whatever the finished size is of your half square triangle, you're going to add at least 7/8 of an inch to that. So if you have a 3-inch finished half square triangle that you need to make, you want to cut your squares at 3 7/8. Now, if you would like to have your half square triangles turn out a little bit oversized so that you can square them up later, then you should add 1 1/8, so an extra 1/4 of an inch. So your 3-inch half square triangle finished size, you would want to cut squares that would be 4 1/8. So 3 7/8 inch squares for a 3-inch finished with no extra 4 1/8 inch squares if you want to have a little extra so you can square up. So there are a variety of different tools that you can use. I have 3 of them laying right here that you can use to mark the sewing lines on a half square triangle square that you're going to make 2 of. I'm going to start out by showing you the Creative Grids tool. I love this tool because it has the Creative Grids grip on the back side, and when you're marking these, you are marking right on the bias, and the fabric tends to stretch and squirm a little bit on you, and it's nice to have that grip to hold it down. This also has a notched end, so I will line that notched end up on my one end. My other end, I'm just going to go ahead and line the groove up, and now I'm ready to mark my sewing lines, because you need to mark sewing lines a 1/4 of an inch from the center line, and that's what this nice little 1/2 inch ruler is designed to do, is to let you mark your sewing lines a 1/4 of an inch off the center. Now, the one unique thing about this tool is it actually has a notch in the center. So if you want to make a couple little tick marks so that you know where you're going to cut that block apart, you can go ahead and do that. So the blue lines are your sewing lines that I marked with my friction pen, and then these other marks are where you would cut. So it gives you a little guideline for cutting. Now, anytime you're using a tool like this, you want to make sure that you're picking a marking pen that will let you get close to the ruler. So it needs to be something that's got a fine point that will let you get very close to the edge of that ruler. So definitely a fine point pen so you can get close to it, so you get a good accurate line marked on it. When you're sewing these, because you've marked with a 1/2 inch ruler, you're going to always be just slightly further out, I find, when I mark them. So I've sewn this block in red so you guys can see. I sew not on top of that line that I marked, but right beside it. So I'm going to sew right beside that line towards the center, and that, for me, if I'm making my half square triangles at the exact size, now if you're making them oversized and going to trim them, you don't need to worry, but if you're making them at the exact size, for me that will yield the correct size triangle. But I want to sew beside it, not on top of it. For oversized blocks, though, you don't need to worry. So that is one option for marking those lines. The one tool that I have here today is an interesting tool, because it is a tool that will cut half square triangles with this end. It will square them up with the center area, so it will also square up, and it has a groove in it. I'm going to see if I can get that in an angle where you can see that groove. So it is set up so that it can do the marking like we just did with the wand style tool. You can lay it down and line that black line up with the corners of your block, and you can mark along the side here, and you can use that groove to mark on that side of the 1/4 inch. So it's kind of an interesting tool. It has a lot of different things. The other tool that I want to show you is the Quilter's Magic Wand. It works very similar to the first tool that we looked at. This tool has an etched line, and you are lining, get it right side up here, you are lining that etched line up with the corners of your block. So there is the etched line, and I will go ahead and mark my lines. Now this big square is intended for the eight half square triangles at a time method. So to do 8 half square triangles at a time, you need a fairly large square. So for 8 at a time, you're going to mark both diagonals. So not just the one, you're going to mark both, and you're going to sew on all of these blue lines. So you'll mark both sides and sew all of the blue lines, and then go ahead and when you cut, you will cut here and here like you did with the 2 at a time method, but you will also cut here and here. So this will get cut in multiple places. You'll cut both diagonals and you'll cut the vertical and the horizontal, and that will yield your 8 half square triangles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that is the 8 at a time method. So the square size for 8 at a time, you're going to take the finished size of your block times 2. So if you have a 3-inch, you want a 3-inch finished half square triangle, you're going to take that times 2, and that would be 6, and you're going to add 1 3/4 inches. So that would be 7 3/4 inches. So 3-inch finished times 2 is 6, add an extra 1 3/4 inches, and you're at 7 3/4 inches. Now if you want to make these oversized, add an extra 2 inches. So rather than adding an extra 1 3/4 inches, add an extra 2. So if you want an oversized block that's 3-inch finished, 3 times 2 is 6, plus an extra 2 is 8. So an 8-inch square is what you would need. So this is a great way when you have a lot of half square triangles that you need to make. You do have to have a fairly large square though when you start out. So if you only need a few half square triangles, you may not have that much fabric. If you're using scraps or you're working with a kit, you may not be able to cut that big square. So then consider going to the 2 at a time method, and that might work well for you. So you don't need as big of a square to start out with the 2 at a time method. So look at how many you have to cut, and look at the amount of fabric that you have available to cut from, and that will help you decide what is the best method for making your half square triangles. Thanks for joining us. You can find all of these tools on our website at redpinequiltshop.com.